Love is not just for this world. If you want to discover feelings that transcend boundaries, subscribe now. The Zyon Vanguard drifted through the quiet void, its artificial gravity humming in a steady rhythm, a heartbeat of machinery and purpose. Inside, the recycled air carried the faint tang of metal, sterilized beyond scent, except for the salt of sweat clinging to Lieutenant Alex Carter as he collapsed onto the bench in the ship's mess hall. His muscles ached from training, his pulse still a notch above resting, his mind pleasantly dulled by exhaustion. Across from him, Vela, his Zilithian squad mate, sat unmoving, hands resting lightly on the table, fingers curled just enough to suggest restraint. She always carried herself like that. Measured, precise, controlled. The Zilithians prided themselves on discipline, on mastering every aspect of their biology. Their warriors trained not only in combat, but in the art of suppressing base instinct, of reducing themselves to creatures of pure calculation. Alex had never once seen a Zilithian unnerved. Until now, the first sign was her silence. Not the comfortable, expectant kind, but something else, tense, unnatural, like a system processing data it was never designed to handle. Then, almost imperceptibly, her skin began to shift. Zilithians didn't have a fixed complexion. Their coloring adjusted to mood and thought, flashing signals in a silent language honed over generations. Vela's usual muted bronze wavered, flickering through a storm of hues. Russet, silver, deep blue, before darkening into violet, rich and saturated, almost black. Alex had never seen that color on her. Not on any Zilithian. The air between them thickened. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice steady despite the knot tightening in his gut. Vela didn't answer immediately. Her pupils, normally thin slits, had dilated into wide, dark pools. Her breathing had changed, not quite erratic, but deeper, slower, controlled only by force of will. Then she swallowed, as if speaking required effort. "Your scent," she said, each word deliberate, like she was testing the weight of them, "is affecting me." Alex blinked. He must have misheard. "My what?" Her exhale came measured but heavy, a soldier containing a strain she didn't understand. She flexed her fingers once, then stilled them. "I don't know how to describe it in your language. It is..." She hesitated, tension rippling across her shoulders, provoking a response. A prickle ran down Alex's spine. He shifted, suddenly aware of the damp fabric clinging to his skin, the sweat cooling against his collar. His sweat. Was that what she meant? A few hours ago, he would have laughed. Zilithians weren't exactly known for their emotional range, let alone anything resembling biological attraction. Their society functioned on logic over passion, efficiency over indulgence. Even their closest approximation of companionship was a matter of genetic compatibility, calculated and sterile. And yet, Vela, this razor-sharp warrior who had never shown a flicker of undisciplined behavior, was looking at him like he was an anomaly she couldn't solve. Across the hall, two Zilithian officers had taken notice. Their skin shimmered with uncertainty, an unspoken question flashing between them. Whatever was happening to Vela, it wasn't just unusual. It was wrong. Alex exhaled sharply and pushed himself up from the bench. "Come on," he muttered, keeping his voice low. "Let's get you to medical." For a moment, she hesitated. Her jaw tightened. But then, without another word, she stood and followed. The Zyon Vanguard's medical bay gleamed with artificial sterility, its walls lined with hollow displays streaming unreadable data. Every surface was pristine, clinical, the kind of place designed to fix problems that had names. This one didn't. Dr. Hayes, the ship's chief medic, glanced up from his tablet as they entered. His gaze flickered between them, landing on Vela with mild interest before sharpening. "What's the issue?" Alex started to explain, but Vela spoke first. "My body is undergoing an unsanctioned response." That phrasing, unsanctioned, like it was an error in her programming, like she was malfunctioning. Hayes frowned. "Symptoms?" Alex crossed his arms, glancing at Vela. She was still standing with military rigidity, though the tension in her jaw had deepened. Elevated body temperature, Alex supplied. Dilated pupils, and some kind of reaction to human sweat. Dr. Hayes paused, one brow arching. He looked at Vela. Is that correct? Yes. A single clipped word, spoken with reluctance. Hayes exhaled through his nose, tapping something on his tablet. That's new. Xylithians didn't have unexplained biological responses. Their genetics had been engineered, refined over centuries to function with perfect precision. Every function had a purpose. Every reaction was understood. Lay back, he instructed, already pulling up the scanning apparatus. Let's see what we're dealing with. Vela hesitated. It was brief, barely a flicker of resistance, but Alex saw it. She didn't like this. Didn't like not knowing. But she complied, shifting onto the examination table with the kind of controlled movement that spoke of training drilled so deep it overrode hesitation. The scanner hummed to life. Blue light pulsed over her form, gathering data in streams too fast for human comprehension. Hayes watched the readings, his frown deepening. She's right. Metabolic shifts, hormonal spikes, even minor physiological alterations. He glanced up, but only when Carter is nearby. Alex stiffened. What the hell does that mean? Hayes didn't answer right away. He expanded the display, swiping through the data. Xylithians evolved beyond involuntary mating cycles centuries ago, he muttered. They don't experience physical attraction the way humans do. Their reproductive system was entirely controlled. He exhaled, shaking his head. And yet, here we are. Alex felt a flicker of unease. So what's causing it? Hayes glanced at Vela, then at him. I think her body is interpreting you as a highly compatible mate. The words hit the air like a gunshot. Vela's entire form went still. Her expression didn't change, but Alex could feel the tension radiating off her. That's absurd, she said. And yet, her voice had lost its usual cold detachment. No offense, Alex said, but I don't think I signed up for that kind of first contact. Hayes sighed, rubbing his temple. The problem is, we don't know what's causing this. It's not pheromones in the traditional sense. If it were, other Xylithians would be reacting the same way. He turned the display toward Alex. This is genetic. Something in you is triggering something in her. Silence thickened between them. Finally, Vela inhaled. Her hands curled in a fist at her sides, nails pressing into her palms. Her next words came slow, deliberate, as though forcing them into existence. I cannot suppress this. That admission, that yielding, it rattled Alex more than anything else. She turned to him, jaw tight, the warrior in her still fighting something she could not control. I need your help. The words settled between them like a fault line waiting to split open. For the first time in his career, Alex had no protocol, no chain of command to fall back on. No easy answers. And the worst part? He wasn't sure he wanted one. The tension in the UN Vanguard's medical bay coiled tight, heavy as the artificial gravity pressing them to the deck. Alex stood rigid, eyes shifting between the unconscious Xylithian officers sprawled across the pristine floor and Vela, who still hadn't moved since the fight ended. She was staring at her own hands. Not in shock, not even in awe, in calculation. Something had changed in her, something more than what the scans had shown. Her breathing had steadied, controlled again, but her stance was looser, more fluid, as if her body had adjusted, compensating for a form that was no longer entirely Xylithian. Alex had seen Vela fight before. He had trained with her, studied the precision of her movements. Xylithians didn't waste energy on unnecessary motion. They struck like surgical blades, fast and efficient. But this had been something else. She had moved faster than any Xylithian should, hit harder than her frame should allow, reacted before her attackers had even finished committing to their movements. It wasn't just instinct. It was evolution. The alarms blared, piercing and absolute. A ship-wide security lockdown initiated the moment the officer's vitals spiked erratically on the monitoring system. It wouldn't be long before reinforcements arrived. Vela exhaled slowly. Her pupils had constricted again, returning to their usual razor-thin slits, but the hue of her skin remained darker, richer, more alive. Dr. Hayes was the first to break the silence. You just incapacitated two high-ranking Zilithian officers in under 5 seconds. His voice was level, but his grip on his tablet had gone white-knuckled. Would you like to explain how? Vela flexed her fingers, tilting her head slightly, as if the movement itself felt foreign. No. Hayes exhaled sharply, muttering something under his breath before turning to Alex. We're out of time. Command will be here any minute, and I guarantee they're not coming to negotiate. Alex already knew that. His mind raced, sifting through options, discarding them just as quickly. Fighting their way out wasn't feasible, not against an entire security force. Hiding was equally impossible. That left one option. Vela met his gaze, reading his expression instantly. We need to leave. Alex nodded once, decision made. Hayes cursed. You realize what you're saying? You're talking about deserting Carter. You really want to be labeled a traitor over this. Alex glanced at the unconscious officers, then back at Vela. They weren't here to negotiate either document. You saw it. They weren't taking her in for questioning. This wasn't containment. This was erasure. Hayes didn't argue. He didn't need to. They all knew the truth. Xylithians didn't allow uncontrolled mutations. Their entire species had spent generations refining themselves, engineering their biology into predictability. What had just happened in this room wasn't supposed to happen. And if Command got their hands on Vela, they wouldn't study her. They would eliminate her. Hayes dragged a hand down his face, the weight of reality settling in. You're really going through with this, aren't you? Alex nodded. The doctor exhaled, shaking his head. Then we need a plan. The ship was in lockdown, meaning they wouldn't be able to simply walk to an escape pod without triggering another security breach. Even if they could get to one, the Vanguard had countermeasures in place. Unauthorized departures would be dead in space before they could reach open flight. They needed distraction, misdirection, and a way to override security without setting off every alarm on the ship. Hayes moved to the nearest console, his fingers flying over the interface. I can buy you time by scrambling internal sensor data. That'll delay their ability to track you, but you'll still need to get off this ship undetected. Alex nodded. Vela, how do Zilithian vessels handle emergency extractions? She was already moving, her body language sharper now, like her mind had snapped in a tactical focus. There are override protocols for high-value extractions. If I can access a command terminal, I can authorize an evacuation shuttle. Can you do it without triggering an alert? Vela hesitated. That was answer enough. Alex weighed the risks. They didn't have a choice. The alternative was waiting for security forces to storm the medical bay and take her. He had seen what Xylithians did to genetic anomalies. He wasn't about to let that happen. Where's the nearest access point? Vela's eyes flicked to the display on the wall, calculating. Deck 7. Maintenance sector. Fewer personnel, less oversight. Alex checked his sidearm. It wouldn't do much against Vanguard security forces, but it was better than nothing. Then that's where we're going. Hayes turned away from the console, face grim. I'll cover for you as long as I can. But when Command figures out what's happening, they'll come after you with everything they've got. We know, Alex said. The doctor studied them both and exhaled. Damn it, Carter. Just don't get yourselves killed. Alex offered him a tight smile. No promises. Vela was already at the door, waiting. He didn't hesitate. They slipped into the corridor just as the first security teams arrived at the medical bay, alarms still blaring overhead. No turning back now. The hunt had begun. The alarm still rang through the Zyon Vanguard. The ship's heartbeat now an urgent, insistent warning. The metal beneath Alex's boots vibrated faintly, a reminder that time was thinning around them, that at any second, commandos would storm the launch bay, weapons raised, orders clear. Vela stood rigid beside him, her gaze locked on Dr. Hayes, the man who had just sealed their fate. You locked us in, Alex said, his voice low, edged with restrained fury. Why? Hayes leaned forward over the console, his face shadowed under the flickering emergency lights. Because if I hadn't, you'd already be dead. Vela's skin darkened, shifting into deep violet. Not the controlled shade she usually displayed, but something raw, pulsing. Explain, she demanded. Hayes exhaled through his nose, rubbing a hand over his jaw. He looked tired. Not just the exhaustion of a man who had spent too many hours fighting bureaucratic decisions, but the kind of fatigue that came from carrying knowledge too heavy to bear alone. "They don't see this as a mutation," he said, finally meeting Vela's eyes. "Not an accident." He hesitated, his fingers curling against the console as if bracing himself for the words. "They see it as an infection." The bay felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing inward. The alarm's hum faded to the background, replaced by a silence so dense it felt viscous. Alex's gut twisted. I mean, Hayes said, voice grim, "They think it spreads." For the first time, Vela took a step back. Just one. Just small enough to be unnoticeable to someone who hadn't been studying her every move. Alex noticed. "That's not possible," she said, but there was something in her tone. An uncertainty, a crack in the foundation of her certainty. "They don't care if it's possible," Hayes shot back. "All they care about is the fact that you changed, and they don't understand why. And if there's one thing Xylithians can't tolerate, it's biological unpredictability." Alex took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay level-headed. A controlled soldier could win any fight, but a panicked one was already dead. "All right," he said. "Let's assume command sees her as some kind of contamination. What does that mean? What's their plan?" Hayes' expression was answer enough. Vela exhaled sharply. "Eradication." Hayes nodded. "They won't take risks. If this is an anomaly, they'll wipe it out. If it's a new strain of something, they'll sterilize the source. If they think it can spread." He stopped, but they all understood. They weren't just coming for Vela. They were coming for anyone who had been in contact with her. Alex swore, running a hand over his face. "We need to get off this ship." "No," Vela said, voice measured but too even, like she was forcing control she no longer possessed. "We need to destroy whatever data they have on me first. If they capture us, they will study me. And if they study me, they will not stop until they find a way to weaponize or eliminate this entirely." Alex didn't argue. He'd seen what happened when military command got hold of something it didn't understand. He wasn't about to let that happen to her. Hayes grimaced. "You'll need the command override key. It's stored in the primary data core, Deck 3. Alex exhaled through his teeth. "You're telling me we have to go back toward security instead of away from it?" "If you don't, this doesn't end with you two escaping," Hayes said. "It ends with this entire ship being purged, because that's the only way they can be sure it's contained." Vela glanced at Alex. "I will go alone." "The hell you will. You're slowing me down." Alex folded his arms. "Vela, I don't care how fast you are now. You don't know their security patterns. You don't know the kill boxes. You don't know how to." "I will learn," she said. And that was the part that unsettled him most. Because she wasn't wrong. She was learning faster than anyone should be able to. He saw in the way she moved, predicted, adjusted. But speed wasn't everything. "Not happening," Alex said. "We do this together." A muscle in her jaw twitched, but she didn't argue further. Hayes pulled up a schematic. "The fastest route is through Service Corridor 5, but it's a gamble. You'll have to pass through 2 security checkpoints. Alternative, there isn't a better one unless you feel like crawling through half a kilometer of ventilation shafts." Alex clenched his jaw. They were out of choices. Vela moved first, fast and soundless, and Alex followed, ignoring the sinking weight in his chest. The corridors of Deck 3 were tighter, more structured, the lighting dimmer, less about navigation, more about control data integrity. They approached the first checkpoint cautiously, Alex counting patrol patterns, waiting for the right gap. 2 guards, armed, not wearing full combat gear, but not relaxed either. Alex exhaled. "We can take them." Vela was already moving. She wasn't just faster, she was anticipating their reactions before they even made them. She closed the distance in a fraction of a second, one hand striking precisely at the pressure point beneath the first guard's ribs, the other snapping toward his partner's throat before he could even raise his weapon. Alex had never seen anyone move like that. He barely had time to steady the first unconscious guard's body before it hit the ground. Vela was breathing steadily, her skin flickering between violet and deep indigo. She hadn't even broken a sweat. Alex didn't let himself hesitate. He grabbed the nearest security key and bypassed the checkpoint. The data core was ahead. They reached the terminal, and Vela interfaced with the system. The Zilithian security layers should have locked her out, but the system barely hesitated before giving her access. Alex caught the flicker of her expression. Not surprise, not even confusion, recognition. "What did you just do?" he asked. She didn't look at him. "I accessed the override. You shouldn't have been able to." She still didn't look at him. The data purge activated, the files unraveling, erasing any trace of her genetic shift. The system wouldn't even register the deletion. It would simply vanish from records, as if it had never existed. Alex watched her fingers flex against the interface. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. The alarms changed tone. This time, it wasn't a security alert. It was a containment breach warning. Hayes's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Whatever you two just did, you need to get out now." "What happened?" Alex demanded. "The ship's AI just registered an unauthorized entity in the data core." Vela turned, her pupils still too large, her skin still shifting in colors that shouldn't exist. Alex felt the truth settle cold in his gut. It wasn't just her abilities that had changed. It was something deeper, something the ship itself had recognized as foreign, something that might not be entirely Zilithian anymore. And the Vanguard wasn't going to let her leave. The blast doors sealed shut behind them. The ship was hunting them now. The blast doors slammed shut with a finality that sent a cold knot of certainty through Alex's gut. They were trapped. The Zyon Vanguard had turned against them. Not just the crew, not just security, but the ship itself. Vela stood beside the data core, her expression unreadable, her body too still. The emergency lights washed over her skin, the shifting violet deepening in color, as if responding to something beyond sight. Alex had seen her fight, watched her move with inhuman precision, but this was something else. She wasn't just faster. She wasn't just stronger. She was recognized by the ship's AI as something other. He gritted his teeth, forcing his brain into motion. "Hayes, tell me you can override this." The doctor's voice crackled over their earpieces, layered with static. "I'm trying, but the ship's AI is flagging Vela as a level 1 biohazard. It's locking down every system to contain her." A pause. Then, with grim finality, "You have minutes before it escalates to purge protocol." Purge, not containment, not capture, elimination. Vela exhaled slowly. "The ship perceives me as a contagion." Alex glanced at her. "That doesn't bother you?" She tilted her head slightly, considering. "It is logical. Logical." His voice came out sharper than intended. "You're being treated like a bioweapon. I might be one." That silenced him. Vela stepped toward the door, running her hand along the reinforced surface, her fingers pressing lightly against the seams. She wasn't panicked. If anything, she seemed curious. The Vanguard had locked them in. That meant it considered this room the problem. "What are you thinking?" Alex asked, watching the way her pupils adjusted, widening, scanning. "The AI has determined I am an anomaly," she said. "It will follow its programming. If containment fails, it will escalate. And escalation means?" She turned to face him fully. "Fire suppression systems, oxygen deprivation, hallucinogenic nerve agents." A pause. Complete atmospheric venting. Alex swore under his breath. "We're not waiting for that." His hands moved instinctively to his wrist console, scanning for an alternative route, but the system was already ahead of him. Every access point had been sealed. Every ventilation shaft rerouted. There was no way out. Vela pressed her palm flat against the blast door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a deep shudder rippled through the metal. Alex tensed. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer. The panel beside the door flickered, its security interface flashing error codes in a looping sequence, systems scrambling to correct something it couldn't define. The ship's AI was fighting itself, as if it couldn't decide whether to expel her, contain her, or let her go. Then with a hiss, the locks disengaged. The door slid open. Alex took a step back. "Vela." She turned, eyes sharp. "Move." She didn't need to say it twice. They sprinted into the corridor just as the security override re-engaged, slamming the doors shut behind them. Alarms howled through the ship, but Alex barely heard them over the pounding of his pulse. Vela had just overridden the ship's lockdown. Without a terminal, without command clearance, she had willed it open. He didn't have time to process what that meant. Not now. Not while survival depended on speed. Hayes, where's the nearest access point to the fighter bay? The doctor's voice came ragged through the comms. Deck 5. You're closest to the emergency access corridor, but security's already moving to intercept. Alex scanned the corridor ahead. It branched in 3 directions, one leading deeper into the command sectors, the other towards storage, and the last towards service tunnel 12. He made the choice in an instant. Tunnel 12. Vela, you take point. She didn't hesitate. They moved fast, keeping low, boots silent against the metal grating. The air was thick with the pressure of lockdown protocols, the distant sound of doors sealing behind them like a ship closing its jaws. They were running out of time. The tunnel opened into a secondary maintenance corridor, dimly lit, the hum of power conduits vibrating beneath their feet. They were halfway through when the lights shifted, not the flickering emergency reds, but something deeper, darker. The ship itself was recalibrating. Vela stopped so abruptly that Alex nearly collided with her. Her skin pulsed a shade of blue-black, pupils constricting. Vela, she turned her head slightly, silencing him with a gesture. Then Alex heard it. Not footsteps, not alarms, something else. A low, thrumming resonance, barely audible, like the ship was listening. Then the walls shivered. Alex felt the air pressure drop, his ears popping as the corridor narrowed. Not physically, but perceptually, as if the ship was collapsing space around them, guiding them, funneling them. Hayes, he said, voice tight. What the hell is happening? The doctor's response came clipped. The AI is adapting. A pause. It's not just treating Vela as an infection anymore. It's treating her as a foreign intelligence. Alex's stomach twisted. The Vanguard wasn't trying to purge her anymore. It was trying to communicate. Vela exhaled, closing her eyes. The resonance in the walls deepened, and for a second, just a fraction of a breath, Alex swore he saw movement under her skin. Then her eyes snapped open. "We need to go," she said. She was already moving before he could ask what she had seen. The final stretch to the fighter bay was a blur, dodging patrols, rerouting through storage corridors, forcing their way through maintenance locks that should have taken minutes to override, but disengaged the moment Vela touched them. Then they were inside. Rows of sleek UN recon fighters lined the launch bay, their exteriors gleaming under cold overhead lights. The emergency launch protocols had already been engaged, probably by Hayes, meaning they had a 10-second window before command shut them down again. Alex moved fast, yanking open the nearest cockpit. "Vela, get in." She hesitated. That was new. "Vela." She turned, her gaze sharp, and for the first time, uncertain. "If I leave this ship," she said, voice lower, "I may not be able to return." Alex exhaled. "That's the idea." "No," she said. "I mean," she stopped herself, her jaw tightening. "It has already changed me. The AI, the ship, whatever was happening, it wasn't finished. And if they left now, there was no telling what she would become. But there was no time for doubt." Alex grabbed her wrist, grounding her, pulling her toward the open fighter. "Vela, we don't have the luxury of figuring that out right now." For a second, he thought she might resist. Then she moved. The cockpit sealed shut around them just as the lockdown protocols kicked back in, sealing the fighter bay, cutting off their only exit. Alex's hands flew over the controls, bypassing command overrides, hot-wiring the ignition. The engines roared to life. Behind them, the blast doors trembled, and then something hit them from the other side. Not a person, not security, something bigger. The ship was reacting. Vela inhaled sharply. "Alex," she said. He punched the thrusters. The fighter launched into the void, the hull screaming as they tore free of the Vanguard's grip, its systems fighting to pull them back even as they escaped. Then, in a burst of acceleration, they were free, drifting into open space. But Alex didn't feel relief. Because Vela wasn't looking at the ship. She was looking at her own reflection in the glass. And she didn't look entirely Zilithian anymore. The fighter cut through the void, its engines a steady hum beneath Alex's hands. The Zyon vanguard had shrunk behind them, reduced to a distant silhouette against the sprawl of stars. But even as the ship faded from view, its presence lingered, a weight pressing into his skull. Vela sat rigid beside him, her gaze fixed on the reflection in the cockpit glass. Her fingers flexed against her thigh, curling, releasing, like she was testing the mechanics of her own body. Alex saw what she saw. Her skin still carried the telltale shimmer of a Zilithian, but the pattern of it had changed. Faint ridges now traced the contours of her arms, subtle, organic, almost human in their symmetry. Her pupils, once the narrow slits of her kind, had rounded slightly, adjusting too quickly to shifts in the dim cockpit light. Even her breathing was different, not the slow, deliberate rhythm of Zilithian control, but something shallower, more reflexive. She was still changing. Alex exhaled, keeping his focus on the NAV system. We need a safe zone, somewhere to regroup. Vela didn't answer. He cast her a glance. Vela! She blinked, snapping back to the present. Yes. You with me? A pause. Then yes. It didn't sound like certainty. He adjusted the trajectory, searching for an outpost where they could disappear, somewhere off-grid, outside Zyon jurisdiction. The Vanguard would already have a fleet scanning for them. Running wasn't enough. They needed a plan. Vela shifted in her seat, her fingers pressing lightly against the console. You assume they will pursue. Alex huffed a dry laugh. That ship just tried to kill you. If Command thinks whatever's happening to you is a contagion, they won't stop until they're sure it's gone. She tilted her head slightly. Including you. He didn't answer, because she was right. If the Zyon believed this was infectious, he was a liability too. He had been in close contact. He had helped her escape. His name was already marked. There was no going back. Vela studied him for a moment longer, then returned her gaze to the stars. There's a neutral station near the outer colonies. No primary faction controls it. We will be difficult to track there. Alex checked the star charts. She was right. A station called Daros 9 floated along the fringe of known space, a halfway point for smugglers, rogue traders, and those who didn't want to be found. No official alliance. No interference. It was their best shot. He keyed in the coordinates. It's a long haul. We'll need to make a few short jumps to avoid being traced. Vela nodded, but her fingers twitched again, an unconscious response she usually would have suppressed. Alex turned fully toward her. How bad is it? She stilled. I do not know. It wasn't evasion. It was the truth. She flexed her hands again, watching the way the ridges beneath her skin shifted, as if something beneath the surface was still arranging itself, still deciding what it wanted to be. Alex forced himself to stay level. Do you feel different? Vela's eyes flickered to his, unreadable. Yes. The word hung between them, heavy, unspoken meanings threading through it. He swallowed the unease crawling up his spine. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't just about running. It was about what she was becoming. He faced forward, gripping the controls. We'll figure it out when we get there. Vela didn't respond. She wasn't looking at her reflection anymore. She was looking at her hands. The jump to Daros 9 was rough, the fighter's short-range drive pushing its limits, but they made it. The station loomed ahead, a battered, sprawling structure of repurposed hulls and mismatched architecture, orbiting the ruins of a planet that had been stripped bare decades ago. No security clearance required. No questions asked. Alex eased the fighter into docking alignment, waiting for the automated clamps to engage. The ship shuddered as it latched onto the station's frame, pressure equalizing. The comms crackled. A bored voice filtered through. Welcome to Daros 9. No weapons drawn inside. No credits, no service. Don't start a fight unless you plan on finishing it. The channel cut. Alex exhaled. Charming place. Vela was already unbuckling her harness. It will serve. They stepped into the docking bay, the air thick with oil, coolant, and the distant tang of something burning. The space was crowded but impersonal, Humans, Xylithians, and other species moving with the same careful disinterest, each absorbed in their own survival. Alex kept Vela close as they wove through the crowd, searching for a contact, an information broker, someone who could help them disappear. Vela walked with purpose, but Alex could tell she was still adjusting. The way her muscles reacted too quickly when someone brushed past her, the way she took an extra second to gauge distance when stepping over debris. She was still calibrating, still becoming. A voice cut through the din. "You look like someone in need of a favor." Alex turned. The broker was human, or at least mostly human. Augmentations gleamed along his forearms, his eyes carrying the faint shimmer of optic enhancements. He leaned lazily against a rusted railing, arms folded, watching them like a predator evaluating its prey. Alex kept his stance neutral. "Depends on what you're selling." The broker smirked. "New identities, new routes, new lives." His gaze flicked to Vela. "And in your case, maybe something else." Alex tensed. Vela met the man's stare, unreadable. "Explain." The broker tilted his head, his augmented pupils contracting. "You're not standard Xylithian." "A beat." "Not anymore." The silence between them stretched just long enough to be dangerous. Alex's fingers twitched toward his weapon. "We're just passing through." The broker chuckled, pushing off the railing. "Sure. And I'm just a humanitarian." He glanced between them again, something calculating in his expression. "You might want to be careful who you talk to. Places like this, people pay good money for anomalies." Alex's jaw tightened. Vela remained still, but her skin darkened slightly, a slow ripple of color moving across her frame. The broker noticed. His smirk widened. "Well," he said, stepping back into the crowd. "Good luck with that." Then he was gone. Alex exhaled through his nose, forcing his muscles to relax. He turned to Vela. "We're not safe here. We were never safe." He couldn't argue, but something was shifting. The walls were closing in, the galaxy shrinking around them. And for the first time, Alex wondered if running was already pointless. The air inside Duros. 9 carried the weight of too many lives pressed together in close quarters. The stale scent of oil, sweat, and metallic dust clung to Alex's skin as he navigated the station's maze of narrow walkways. Every corner held a set of watching eyes, each glance weighing the risk of getting involved, of knowing too much. Vela moved beside him, her pace even controlled. But he could see it, the tension coiled beneath her skin, the way her body reacted before her mind did. She wasn't struggling to adjust anymore. She was merging with something unknown, something not quite Xylithian, not quite human. And that made her target. The broker's words still lingered in Alex's mind. People pay good money for anomalies. They needed to disappear. They slipped into a dim-lit repair bay tucked beneath one of the station's docking rings. The walls were lined with decommissioned starship parts, old plasma coils stacked in haphazard towers, and mechanics too tired or too jaded to ask questions. A woman in grease-streaked overalls leaned against a rusted support beam, arms crossed, an old cybernetic implant glinting in the hollow of her left cheek. "You looking to scrap or steal?" Alex held her gaze. "Neither. We need a ship." She smirked. "Ships cost credits. And you don't look like you have many of those." Vela stepped forward. "We can offer something else." Alex shot her a look, but she didn't flinch. The mechanic raised a brow. "That's so." Vela's eyes flickered, something shifting in the depths of her irises. The mechanic stiffened, not in fear, but in recognition. "Hell," she muttered. "You're the one they're hunting." Alex tensed. His hand drifted toward his sidearm, but the woman lifted a placating hand. "Relax, soldier boy. I don't sell people out. Too much heat." She glanced back at Vela. "But you might be a problem." Vela tilted her head, studying her. "Why?" The mechanic snorted. "Because people don't like what they can't control. And you." She gestured vaguely. "You're something new." Alex clenched his jaw. "Are you going to help us or not?" She sighed, rubbing her temple. "You need a ship. I've got one. But it's not cheap, and I don't do charity." Vela took a step closer, her voice lower now. "What do you need?" The mechanic hesitated, then exhaled. There's a cargo freighter docked in Base 6. Belongs to a syndicate that's been choking supply routes out here. You get rid of them, I get my station running clean again. You take the ship as payment. Alex weighed the risk. Syndicates weren't like governments. They didn't follow rules. If they engaged, there would be no clean escape, no diplomatic exit. Vela met his gaze. We can do it. He studied her, searching for doubt. There was none. Fine, he said. They moved quickly, weaving through the station's back corridors, avoiding the main thoroughfares where syndicate eyes would be watching. Base 6 loomed ahead, a cavernous docking hangar filled with crates of stolen cargo, armed enforcers stationed at every exit. Alex counted 8, maybe more. Vela's breathing shifted, subtle but distinct. Not anxious, focused. He placed a hand on her arm. We do this quietly. She didn't blink. Understood. They slipped into the shadows, moving along the perimeter. Alex found an opening, a moment where one of the guards broke formation, stepping toward the edge of the loading platform. Before he could react, Vela moved. She was there in an instant, her hand wrapping around the guard's throat, cutting off sound before he could alert the others. He barely had time to struggle before she lowered him silently to the ground. Alex exhaled. It should have taken effort. It didn't. Vela glanced at him, waiting for the next move. They advanced, dismantling the operation piece by piece. A silent shot, a blade cutting through weak points in armor, a whispered choke of breath before collapse. By the time the last enforcer fell, the bay was silent. The ship was theirs. Alex moved to the control panel, overriding the docking clamps. The freighter hummed to life, its systems sluggish from neglect, but functional. Vela stood at the entrance, watching the corridor behind them. Her skin had darkened slightly, the shifting hues settling into something unfamiliar. Alex swallowed. You okay? She turned to him. Yes. Another lie. The ship's systems engaged, the bay doors opening to the expanse of space beyond. Alex took the pilot's seat, fingers moving across the controls. He wasn't a freighter captain, but he could fly anything that had thrusters. Vela sat beside him. The comms crackled. The mechanic's voice came through. Well, you did it. Didn't think you had nerve. Alex keyed the channel. We held up our end. A chuckle. That you did. Ship's yours. But listen, a pause. Whatever's happening to your friend there, you might want to get ahead of it. Fast. Alex glanced at Vela. She was staring at her hands again. We will, he said, cutting the connection. The freighter launched, breaking free of Darrow's 9's orbit. No alarms. No pursuit. Not yet. Alex leaned back in the pilot's seat, exhaling. Where to? Vela didn't answer right away. Then softly, somewhere far. He nodded. We'll figure it out. She didn't move, didn't look at him. Just kept watching her own reflection. Alex gripped the controls, guiding them into the unknown. They weren't running anymore. They were searching.